Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Sanders Report. It's October 31st, 2024. I wanted to add this preface onto the beginning of this video because right as I was about to post it, of course, I came across an article regarding some of the topics covered in this video that I just made. And it's about the Bank of International Settlements and their decision to step away from the Project mBridge due to the controversy regarding the potential for avoiding sanctions. And last week there was a meeting between the IMF and World Bank at the same time as the BRICS summit. Now one of the reasons I made this video was due to the BRICS summit that just occurred, and I was trying to kind of pass along some information regarding what BRICS was, and I touched on Project mBridge, and sure enough, no sooner than I made the video, right when I was about to post it, I came across this article about how the BIS is moving away from that. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not going to do some type of central bank digital currency program, but looks like they're putting Project mBridge on hold. So keep paying attention to it. But like I said, I just wanted to preface the video with this so that way people aren't listening and saying, oh, well, that's not even a thing anymore. So, but that's it, and I'll get you into the video. All right. Thanks for listening. Happy Halloween. Good morning. Welcome to the Sanders Report. Today's October 31st, 2024. Happy Halloween, everybody. You know, the only thing that I can think of that's scarier than all the ghost ghouls and goblins that are going to be running around tonight is the state of the U.S. economy. Now, this is nothing new. The U.S. economy's been in decline for decades, despite what the mainstream media would like you to believe. Even under Donald Trump, it wasn't good. We had an initial bump from the tax cuts, but then you started to see things decline and you saw the deficits go up. We have a structurally weak economy that doesn't really produce anything. And unfortunately, for your economy to be, growing and improving, you need savings, you need production. That's where the real wealth comes from. And going into the election now, we're hearing some of Donald Trump's proposals for his second term, and he thinks a good solution to everything is tariffs. And tariffs are indirect taxes that can be placed on, imports and exports to protect American industry. And that's, in theory, that's great. Up until the 16th Amendment, almost all of our federal revenue came from tariffs. And the reason I like tariffs more than income taxes is they're an indirect tax, which means that you don't pay those directly to the government. You're going to pay those through when you pay your sales taxes or like a value-added tax or something like that. So if let's say a tariff gets placed on a certain good, if I don't want to pay that tariff, I can avoid it by not purchasing that good. But when you don't have the production capacity to meet the demands of the American consumer, you're just going to make prices go up and you're going to create shortages. So I just don't see us really having the leverage to threaten those tariffs without imposing more harm to ourselves than good. There's no way we'd be able to replace the revenue from income taxes with tariffs at this point. Our economy is based on spending, consumption, and it constantly relies on government stimulus and artificially low interest rates to keep it going. That's what's been going on the past 2 decades. And now we find ourselves between a rock and a hard spot. I mean, if you look at our, you talk about industry, if you look at the PMI, which the PMI is the Purchasing Managers Index, it's one of the most reliable economic indicators of U.S. manufacturing. And it's shown for the past 2 years, we've been in a contraction. And prior to that, we were already in contraction, but then you had the COVID stimulus, which was kind of a bailout. Because prior to COVID, we were going into a contraction. All of that just happened to coincide at the exact same time that, we were getting to the end of the Trump administration. So a lot of people think everything was going well, and then all of a sudden COVID came along. Well, that's not exactly how it was going. We never recovered from the great financial crisis of 2008, despite, again, what you've been told by the mainstream media. We were able to basically kind of put Band-Aids on it and stop the bleeding temporarily. And really, even before the great financial crisis, we never really recovered from the dot-com bust. Greenspan cut rates following that assisted in fueling the bubble and the speculation, which led to the great financial crisis. And I know there were other things that went into it, but essentially, when you create the conditions for it, that's how it happens. And I mean, we could go back even further, and yes, go back to the gold standard. When we got off the gold standard, this was one of the things that led to that. But we got off the gold standard due to our, we spent too much in the 60s. We spent too much on Vietnam, the Great Society, and then you had de Gaulle, with all these. De Gaulle was kind of leading the charge. He was the leader of France at the time, and they were calling out the United States, for having the world reserve currency, and we were basically abusing that privilege. And you started having a bunch of people calling their claims to the gold. And so Nixon closed the gold window. So, I mean, we could go all the way back to there, but we're going to try to keep this relative to the recent U.S. history. And we'll just go back to the great financial crisis. And like I said, we've never recovered from that. The government stepped in with bailouts. We had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. That was Obama's first stimulus act. And the quantitative easing program, which was where the Federal Reserve was buying mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds through banks. They couldn't buy them directly from the Treasury, but what they would do is they would have these large banks go out. The Fed would make its announcement of how many bonds that they were going to buy. So then the banks would buy the bonds from the Treasury. Then the Fed turns around and buys the treasuries from the banks. So we had several rounds of quantitative easing. We had interest rates dropped super low to record lows, like 0.25. And then everybody said, oh, it's a success. We saved the economy. Everything's fine. But they never normalized rates. They never offloaded the treasuries and mortgage-backed securities from their balance sheet. So the program was never really a success. They never did what they said they were going to do. They said they were going to do all this. It was going to be temporary, and then they were going to be able to get things back to normal. Well, that never happened. And candidate Trump, the first time back in 2015, 2016, he was accurately pointing this out. He was talking about how Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve were being extremely political, and they were kind of creating this facade of a good economy and acting like everything was getting better. And he was accurately pointing out that it was a bubble. The inflation at the time had settled into assets. The inflation was settling in the stock market. The inflation was settling in real estate. And these are all places where when inflation drives up the prices, the people that own that feel good. It's kind of the wealth effect. They're looking at their paper assets and everything, and they're thinking, oh, I'm doing really well, so everything's got to be going good. Well, Trump called that out, and I'll get the link to the debate. But the first debate between Trump and Hillary, he called that out. He said, look, everything's in a big bubble. He said, whenever the Fed starts to raise interest rates, you're going to see a massive correction. And he was right. But as soon as he got elected, he started walking that back. He got elected, nothing changed, but hey, the economy was great again. So Trump claimed that the economy was simply great again by him getting into office. And then when his pick, Jerome Powell, Trump's own pick for the head of the Federal Reserve, started to raise interest rates, Trump started to attack him. So in Powell's defense, that's what needed to happen. Rates needed to come up. And that started to spook the markets. And Trump was mad about it. And then towards the end of the Trump administration, Jerome Powell was starting to pull back. The Fed was starting to cut rates again. And Trump was attacking Powell for not cutting rates fast enough. Trump wanted rates all the way back down to zero. Well, Trump would end up getting exactly what he wanted anyway, because the COVID crisis hit and the Federal Reserve ended up cutting rates back down to zero. So during Donald Trump's administration, we added approximately $8 trillion to the national debt. Now, granted, I'll give it to you. The majority of that came in his last year due to the COVID crisis. Well, now we're on track to add approximately the same amount without the COVID crisis. You know, supposedly the economy's doing great. But if that's the case, why are we still running large deficits? Why are we still adding to the debt considerably? Now, right now, we're at $35.8 trillion in debt. And people are finally starting to realize that that's a big issue. But people have been warning about this for decades, to the point where there's almost a normalcy bias, like a complacency bias attached to the national debt. People have been screaming for years that the national debt's unsustainable. People have been warning about getting to this point. The interest on our national debt now exceeds $1 trillion. And people dismissed that. They acted like, oh, that's just, you're just Chicken Little. You know, the sky's falling. Everything's fine. No need to worry about the national debt. Well, now it's time to worry. And there's a lot of existential pressure coming against the dollar, coming against our system and against our economy. And this has been caused by the rise of the BRICS. If you don't know what BRICS is, it's an alliance started by Brazil, Russia, India, and China. South Africa was a late addition. That's how it became the BRICS. It's BRICS. And their whole goal is to create a new global economic order. They want to establish a new global reserve currency. But similar to the debt, we've been assured time and again that the BRICS is not a threat. It's not a big deal. It's been around since 2009. And, 15 years ago, people thought you were just a conspiracy theorist talking about stuff like this. Now we've seen it talked about in the media because they can't ignore it any longer. And, they've already been making progress. They've developed a new payment system to replace SWIFT. It's called CBDCs. It's the cross-border interbank payment system. That's in development. And if you're not familiar with SWIFT, it's the current system that we use right now to carry out international wire transfers, monetary transactions. It stands for Society of Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. That's how we impose sanctions on Russia, by blocking them out of the SWIFT system. That's the way that we weaponize the dollar against countries that don't necessarily agree with us or cooperate. And it's also one of the things that's driving people to want to move to a new system not dominated by the United States. Okay, so they've developed a different payment system. They've developed two banks. They've got the New Development Bank, established in 2014, which is made up of the BRICS countries, the UAE, and maybe Egypt. I'm not exactly sure, but it's growing. You've got new members that are trying to get in. And then there's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was started in 2016. Now, this bank is of particular interest to me because when you go through the list of all the members, it's just about everybody but the United States. You can go to their website, and the non-regional members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, meaning not regional in Asia, but it's France, Germany, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and then a whole list of other countries. But I just wanted to point out some of the larger economies that are part of this. And the United States isn't on there. And it's got to raise some eyebrows. This is the second largest multilateral development bank in the world, second only to the World Bank. So we're seeing these new systems built without our influence. So they've got their payment systems, they've got their banks. The next thing they need to develop is the currency. And that's going to be the hardest one because you have so many countries that hold reserves of US treasuries. So this might be the one that takes the longest. They've floated several ideas so far. One, they've considered the idea of using a basket of currencies similar to the International Monetary Fund's SDRs. That's the special drawing rights, which is a form of a reserve currency that the IMF will use to help settle up international payments. They've considered a commodity-backed currency, maybe some type of gold-backed currency or silver or even oil. Like they've talked about maybe priced in barrels of oil, but they've talked about doing a commodity-backed or maybe even a basket of commodities. But the one I think that is probably most likely and one of the ones I find most threatening is a central bank digital currency. And you even hear people in the United States talking about central bank digital currencies. And these are bad. This is like authoritarian's dream come true because it would allow them to control everything in the economy, which essentially means they can control you. Because a central bank digital currency is something that could be programmable and ran through a central bank. And centralization equals manipulation. That's the way it goes. That's the one good thing about the current banking system is that, yeah, you might have a bunch of corrupt banks, but at least you have a bunch of tyrants kind of fighting for power as opposed to one centralized authoritarian actually in control, because that's when it's over at that point. You got the one point of power that gets to implement everything from the top down. So let's just say they want to put restrictions on your consumption. They can determine how much meat you eat, how much gas you get, whether or not you're allowed to buy guns and ammunition. You go to the store and you got to use your Federal Reserve card, and approved purchases not included are guns and ammunition. Or you have an allotment of meat. You can only buy $100 of meat for the month. You go to the store, you can no longer buy your meat. Basically, you're going to be rationed. And it can be controlled because it's all digital. Well, the Bank of International Settlements, which is kind of like the central banks of central banks, it sits at like the top of the structure. They've been working on this thing called Project mBridge. And essentially what Project mBridge is it would act as a hub for central bank digital currencies. Because let's say the United States has their central bank digital currency, and let's say Europe or Germany or China, they have their own central bank digital currency. Well, how are these going to cross over as far as international payments? Well, they have Project mBridge, where the central bank digital currencies will basically come in and interchange and then go back out to wherever they need to go to make the payments good. So central bank digital currencies, I think, are the potential future, and I think we need to resist them as much as possible. I'm a big advocate of using cash. I think people need to use cash a lot more, because if they get rid of cash, another thing that central banks have talked about for years is imposing negative interest rates on people whenever they want to stimulate the economy. So what this means is you've got your money deposited in a bank and they want to get you to go out and stimulate the economy. Well, they'll start imposing a negative interest rate. So all your money in the bank starts losing value unless you spend it. So you got $1,000 in there and they say, we're going to impose a negative 3% rate on all the money that you keep in the bank if you don't spend it within this time frame. So now all of a sudden you lose $30, and they'll keep adding up. So you can't just save your money and you can't pull it out because cash is banned. So that's the problem with that. And again, people think that sounds crazy, but we're getting there. That's the way it goes. Things are gradual and then it's all of a sudden. We've been gradually seeing all these things happen. Kind of like back in June when the Saudis didn't renegotiate the petrodollar deal. Now, what this meant was it was a deal made back in the 70s. And despite what you might have heard, it wasn't to exclusively sell oil in dollars. But what it did was the United States agreed to provide security for the Saudis and do weapons deals with them. And in exchange, the Saudis agreed to reinvest a certain amount of their petrodollars, money raised off their oil sales, were going to be reinvested back into the United States. Well, they didn't renegotiate this, and now it fell apart. So, not the end of the world, but it is a sign. It's just another one of those, it's the next straw on the camel's back. And so when are we going to get there? I don't know. But you can't ignore all the things that have been happening. And also, just so people are aware, central bank digital currencies are not cryptocurrency. So I'm not a big fan of cryptocurrency, but it is, it's a speculative asset. You can make a lot of, like, if you'd have got in on Bitcoin when it first happened, which I promise you I have a lot of regrets about that because I had that opportunity and I missed it. But I don't see the real value in it. But again, if you want to speculate in it and try to make money, that's fine. But central bank digital currencies are not cryptocurrencies. Okay, crypto is actually something that is decentralized and it's good and people can use that. But the thing is, people aren't using it as currency because it's too volatile. Why would I want to use that or accept it as a currency when it can potentially go up in value or drop in value drastically? Like, I don't want to sell you something, then all of a sudden the price of that collapses. It's just too unstable to be a currency. But I honestly think that, or I've speculated that crypto is a trap created by the same people trying to create this new system. And first of all, it kind of has normalized the idea of digital currencies. People won't know the difference between a CBDC and a cryptocurrency. So when governments start talking about central bank digital currencies, people will be more willing to accept these because they're thinking, oh, well, that's probably just like that Bitcoin stuff I heard about, or it's just like that Ether. But it's not. It's not the same at all. But it's kind of conditioned people to this idea of digital currency. Now they hear central bank digital currency and it doesn't set off any alarms. They've gotten it's become normal. And also it's, I think, diverted money that would have been going into other assets like gold and silver. And so it's allowed these central banks to continue to scoop up gold and silver, which if you look at the central banks, they've been purchasing large amounts of gold and silver ever since 2009. They've increased their holdings significantly. So while money that might have been going into those assets has been pouring into a speculative asset like Bitcoin, the central banks have been able to keep the price down while they stock up. So I've always kind of thought maybe this is all just a big distraction. I mean, nobody even knows who created Bitcoin. It's a pseudonym. It's a name, Satoshi Nakamoto. But wouldn't you think somebody that developed something that revolutionary would want credit? Now I've heard, people who say, oh, well, it's not safe. They're worried about their security. They know that their cryptocurrency is a threat to these governments. And if they made themselves known, they would potentially be assassinated. And, I don't know. I guess I could understand that, but I don't buy it. I think cryptocurrencies are a trap, and I think it's just conditioning and paving the way for central bank digital currencies. And that's what I mean. All it's going to take is economic catastrophe, and the Federal Reserve and the government step in. They say, because of this economic collapse, we're going to come to your save. We're going to be your saviors. We're going to give everybody universal basic income. All you have to do is set up your account with the Fed, We're going to pay you with this central bank digital currency, and everybody will accept it. Everybody will. Some people won't have a choice because it's going to be between starving and dying or taking your central bank digital currency. And I don't know, that this last part I'm just speculating here, but I do see central bank digital currencies as a threat. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this early on, because this is the kind of information I want getting out there and people to talk about. And whether you think I'm crazy or not, that's fine. But just like I say, look all this stuff up. Look it up. Do your own research. Because this is what actually controls your life. Now, money's not everything, but it is half of everything. You know, the job you work, the things you buy, everything you do, money's half of everything. It affects us. It controls us. And the governments know that. So please educate yourself. Take steps to become financially independent. And talk to other people about it. You know, people talk about so much stuff that really doesn't affect them. They talk about athletes and all these and I don't have a problem with people that watch sports. I enjoy sports myself, but there's a difference between being consumed with it and, you know, just enjoying it. But, you know, they can tell you every player on a team, or they can rattle off the stats of a player, but they can't tell you who's controlling the currency in their country, you know, or the currency in their own pocket. You know, they don't even understand this. And I get it. It's boring. It's not very interesting, but it is important, and it does actually affect you. You know, who Travis Kelce is dating doesn't affect me, you know, or whatever current drama's going on. That does not affect me at all. But this stuff does. So that's it. I hope y'all get out there, take your kids trick-or-treating tonight, and have a happy Halloween. Thanks for listening.